Oh, look at that.
Okay. Hello everyone. As you may hear, I have no voice, and there are a lot of you. Obviously, I would like to be respectful during the teams, during the rounds, but I was struggling with having no voice.
Please behave. Firstly, I think we should start by congratulating both teams on making it through. On the affirmative, we have Yonsei University, and on the negative, we have ICU. And on the negative, we have ICU. Without further ado, I invite Sewon to open the case for the affirmative. Sewon's preferred pronoun is she.
Is this one working? Should we just...
Thank you, ladies. I'm pretty sure that all of you here agree that you want to live in a state where the government can provide an environment where you can live every day in a safe environment, where you can be made sure that you are living in a safe environment. And in the cases of disasters, the government can take responsibility for you. Now, in today's debate, we're talking about whether the government should be held liable for the deaths of their citizens in the event of a natural disaster. So, we believe that when the governments are by saying that disaster-proof, we mean that the government should provide an actively established infrastructure such as bunkers, and also provide safe citizens who know how to react in cases of disaster. And also, we believe that the government has the moral and the legal liability in the cases of natural disasters. So when we say that they are liable, we think that they should compensate for the death of the victims who died from the disasters. And also they should act to reestablish the society that is harmed after the natural disasters. And we also think that the compensation and the liability should be proportionate. So what does that mean? But the government has actually actively provided the infrastructure and the education to provide the environment for the citizens. We believe that even when some people die from the natural disasters, the compensation and the liability and the harm and the responsibility of the government is somewhat reduced. So we are saying in cases when the government has not actively provided these measures to provide a secure environment, the government is actually held even more responsible, and we believe that the liability should be consistent with the amount of the disaster-proof infrastructure that the government has provided. So with that said, I would like to present two substantives in today's debate. First is about the government's role, and second about how this motion is going to incentivize the government's action. So first about the government's role. The government's role is to provide a secure environment for the citizens. Why? Because the citizens are engaged in a social contract with the government. When the citizens have, they actually have delegated their rights to the government, so that they believe that the government can provide a secure environment, so that the government can provide those measures so that we can all live in a secure environment. Then we have delegated those rights to the government. It is the most fundamental responsibility of the government to provide that thing that we have delegated to the government. Because on the right to live is the most fundamental right as a human being, not only as citizens, but as a human being. And in that case, the government's most fundamental responsibility is to secure the lives of the citizens. And also, what is more important is that everyone has different standards in what is a good life. But everyone actually agrees that at least the right to live in a safe environment is a fundamental right that everyone should have in their lives. And it is something that everyone needs and requires, and that is why, as the government, as the most fundamental entity that can provide these rights to government, they have to provide these to the citizens. And also, why the government should be held liable for the increases of natural because they can minimize the harms in these disasters. The government is the only provider for this disaster. No one said that we can live for because no one caused those natural disasters in the first place. It is something that is out of our reach. No one thinks that it is as the entity that we have delegated the right to. Also, they can minimize the harms coming from the disasters because we need some actions in harmony in order to decrease the casualties that happen in these disasters. Because, for example, in cases of disasters, it is the truth that many people die from the chaos and the disorder that happens during the disasters. For example, when like a fire happens in a building, some people die from being stepped over by people because they don't know how to act in those cases, because everyone is basically trying to escape and there's no order in that place. But what the government can do is they can provide a universal action towards these people so that there is order and we can minimize the harm and decrease the casualties as much as we can do. And also, moving on to the second argument about how it can incentivize government action. The opposition would probably say like how these natural disasters are unforeseeable, and that's why the government should not be liable for these natural disasters. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrong assumption because in today's context, we actually do have those technological developments to make sure that the natural disasters are foreseeable in many cases, especially when those disasters that we're talking about are big enough to cause that much casualties to bring the harm to the society. And because we do have those technological developments to make sure that we do foresee the natural disasters, we think when the government has failed to do this, the government should be liable for the deaths of the citizens. And also, we're going to talk about cases even if the natural disasters are unpredictable. So even if they say that the natural disasters are unpredictable, we still think that the government should be liable for the deaths. Why? Because it's going to push the government to try their best in providing the best measures to preempt and to minimize the harms coming from the natural disaster. They provide in the future that the infrastructure all around, and they should make sure that the citizens are aware of the infrastructure that they have provided to increase the efficiency of the infrastructure. Also, they're going to be pushed more to educate the people to properly act in cases of disasters. So that not many people die from being stepped over by other people from the chaos and the disorder that happens in cases of natural disasters. How we said today, we have said that the government, when they failed to make this a secure environment, disaster-proof in their states for their citizens, they should be held liable for the death of their citizens in the event of a natural disaster. Why? Because first, they have the responsibility as a government to, in the social contract, they have the responsibility to provide a secure environment for their own citizens. And also because they're the only actor that can minimize the harm by providing that universal education and the order that is needed, especially in cases of natural disaster when everyone is trying to escape and when everyone is trying to live their lives. And also, We have said that this motion is going to incentivize the government action to provide better education, to provide better infrastructure and bunkers in cases of natural disasters, because we think that these natural disasters are somewhat foreseeable with the technological advancements that we have in today's society, and also even if it is unpredictable, it is going to push the government to do the best. And we think that this is the best case, and this is the best thing that we want in today's world. So we want to live in a society where the government is responsible and when everyone has that sense of security that they can live on everyday lives, even in cases of natural disasters, especially when the government has failed to provide these things. We believe that the government is liable. Proud to propose.
I'd like to see one and invite staff to open the case for the negative for the program sheet.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are from the country where the huge earthquakes attacked. And we are from Japan, where the technologies are developed already. However, Mr. Speaker, we say that this kind of earthquake is a natural disaster, that no one should be liable, no one can take any kind of responsibility for the death, unfortunately. Even though this kind of development of the technology has been made, even though the kind of government is doing a great job in maximizing their ability to secure their citizens, those kind of natural disasters will attack our nation, and we believe no one should be afraid of that. So I'm going to talk about mainly one thing. Firstly, when is the government liable and when not? I'm going to draw the clear line by giving you the criteria when those kind of nations should be liable and when they are not, and why this case is applicable toward a framework of when the government should not be liable. Before that, several rebuttals toward their side of the house. But they say that their universally, this right to live is so fundamental and it is provided to any nation. However, Mr. Speaker, we believe that it is true, but it doesn't always mean to live in a disaster-proof house. Why? It's because those people who are living in a situation where there is a scarcity of those kind of shelters, scarcity of the welfares, they need those kind of shelters as soon as possible, like not caring about those kind of disaster proofs or not caring about these kind of construction laws. Therefore, like those kind of government who are in charge of their citizens, who have to secure their environment, what today's affirmative has picturized, is that they're playing a role to provide a shelter as soon as possible. We believe that those kind of providing a disaster-proof house, like taking so many years, so many cost of money, it did not always mean that it is fulfilling their role, but it can be fulfilled by providing a house that, even if that is not disaster-proof, but providing a shelter as soon as possible. But secondly, they say that because no one can be asked for responsibility for the death, then the only actor, the government, should take that kind of responsibility. But why, Mr. Speaker? There is a huge logic down here that because it is only one actor, the government should take that kind of responsibility. But furthermore, if that kind of one actor, the government, is the only one who can be the actor to reconstruct the nation, Mr. Speaker. If they have to reconstruct the nation, they need a lot of money, they need a lot of technology. Then in that kind of context, if they compensate for every death of the citizens who were killed in that kind of natural disaster, you can easily see that they will be lacked those kind of resources, Mr. Speaker. Really, given that fact, if they are the only actor to reconstruct the nation, Mr. Speaker, we think that they should not be the actor to take the responsibility. And therefore, Thirdly, they told us that after taking their model, the chaos will not occur. But this is really strange, Mr. Speaker, because chaos in the natural disaster is the human nature that you have to run away from the situation, regardless of this kind of disaster-proof shelters, Mr. Speaker. Those people will be in chaos eventually, even in their product. I cannot see how those people who will be stepped by those other people will be saved. They cannot see. They cannot explain that. So moving on to the first substantive, when is the government liable and when not? I'm going to bring you the criteria. Mr. Speaker, they are liable when the citizens simply wish the disaster-proof, but the government was lazy to do so. We believe that it should be liable when should be liable because that it is simply neglecting citizens' voice. We can see that the principle they have raised of the government that they should play a role to reflect citizens' voice and be the representative of the citizens. Mr. Speaker, we consider that, and we believe that when those kind of citizens simply wish the disaster-proof shelters, they should do so because based on this kind of principle. But when this kind of citizens did not wish this kind of for kind of disaster. We believe that the government, not all citizens are seeking for disaster-proof shelters, but seeking for the shelters they can live in as soon as possible. Given that fact, that not using a lot of cost for the reconstruction law or for the disaster-proof areas, but giving the shelters as soon as possible for the people who are suffering from poverty, people who are suffering from the lack of shelters, who cannot live in a warm, closed shelter, or when this government should. Secondly, that should be because they knew that this kind of disaster can easily attack, Mr. Speaker. For example, there are many areas, areas when the earthquakes or those natural disasters can attack, Mr. Speaker. For example, in Japan, those kind of earthquakes are easy to attack Japan, and therefore, as a consequence, the government has constructed a very disaster area. For example, here to escape from they try our best. Those kind of natural disasters can overwhelm human ability, Mr. Speaker. When that kind of government was taking that kind of fulfilling that kind of role, we say that the government should not be liable. So why this case? Why this kind of natural disasters case is applicable to this kind of case? It's because I'm going to raise two kind of characteristics of the government. One is that when they were making the maximum amount of effort but incapable to enforce the law. I'm going to give you two reasons why they should not be liable. One, because they care about their citizens, Mr. Speaker. Those kind of governments simply care about their citizens because those kind of citizens are the ones who chose the government to rule that one kind of country or to be in charge in that kind of country. And secondly, gamification in the domestic arena and internationally. Firstly, about the domestic area, they care that when they fail to disaster-proof their area, they will lose the election in the next election, or those kind of criticism can be harsh, and internationally they can affect the trading or the diplomacy or so forth. We have given that fact, those kind of government who are hit by the natural disaster are making the great effort, are making the maximum amount of effort. And we believe that they sometimes fail to fully develop the disaster-proof area. Strictly law. For example, geographically impossible to enforce any kind of areas that kind of laws made in the central area, Mr. Speaker, because the area is so far, the area is so big that it is impossible for them to enforce every single area that kind of law. And we believe that given that fact that they have no responsibility, they should not be in the framework of the liability. We're more than happy to stand in the gate.
mentally. Mr. Speaker, when a baby is taken by a tsunami right in front of your eyes, you're devastated. I think no words can describe exactly how bad, how devastated you feel. In these circumstances, we think someone should be to you, to help you. Someone should be next to you to prevent such atrocities happening again to someone next to you or someone other than you. Fundamentally, in today's case scenario, we think the government should be morally, but more importantly, legally liable to ensure it maximizes its utility as a responsible government. The very normative claim that people will die anyways. The very normative claim that natural disasters will happen anyways, we believe is a gross excuse for government to not take responsibility after its people. As I can speak for second, first, information about exactly how this will affect our society. And the argumentation, we're going to provide two levels of analysis. First, we're going to talk about how individuals will also be incentivized to become more aware about themselves, about how in the government relationship. First, about the claim about right to live. Fundamentally, our opposition is misunderstanding today's debate. This debate is not about the government providing disaster shelter in specific regions. The very policy coming from the we want the government to enact policies, we want the country to be implemented throughout our country. But more importantly, we're going to provide education, safety regulations, and safety education throughout the country. It's not about providing specific tents and shelters in specific regions. That's a fundamental contextualization coming from the negative fails. And we want to have more second verification is this. They talk about how the government is the only actor. We fundamentally think, first of all, because the government is the only actor. But second, to a great extent, we argue that natural disasters are a foreseeable harm. The negative does agree. Why? Looking at empirical data of natural disasters that happen in specific regions. But more importantly, because of the development in technology that allows us to estimate exactly how our climate will change, for example, we think to a great extent natural disasters are foreseeable. When that is the case, we argue that the government is the only capable actor that can intervene. Exactly why does that lead to legal or moral reliability of that fundamental institution? The argument coming from the negative was this: it requires too much money knowledge after reconstruction. First of all, given the capacity of the government, given the moment, compensation should be taking care of this that happen as a result of natural disaster. The second, from a perfectly utilitarian calculus, we think that the government participates in social chaos and instability that will happen after natural disaster. The government does not help individuals restabilize their lives. The thing will become a much more of a social cause than the initial cause that we anticipate as the affirmative for the government to be building bunkers and educating people about how to build, how to act. First was the government. Already, this is the appropriate people. They talk about the example of Japan, how they build bunkers. Well, good for Japan. We want other countries to act as much as Japan. But more importantly, we even argue that Japan is not doing enough. We even argue if there's one person that is sacrificed or one person that is dead as a result of natural disaster, within the government should be liable. Within the government should try even more. But that's also where a policy about proportional liability comes into place. We think if the government is doing its best, given its capacities, for example, not liable to preventive measures, for example. The government should be greatly liable, and the government should be morally and socially and legally liable for its lack of capacity or lack of willingness to act for these individuals. So, and more importantly, we think this will incentivize the government to try even further. So our first speaker from the affirmative gave you arguments like how the government will now be incentivized to invest in better technologies that can prevent natural disasters, thereby increasing its forceability when it comes to unpredictable natural disasters. But second, we think it would even incentivize governments, for example, to cause natural or international organizations like NGOs or nearby countries
when it feels its resources are incapable or lacking. We fundamentally think the very claim that the government is trying its very best is not enough of an argument or not enough of an excuse when its people are fundamentally dying. Moving on to the most important third argument coming from the affirmative discourse. Exactly how it is affect society. The very argument, or the biggest claim coming from the first affirmative discourse. When it comes to tackling natural disasters, when it comes to exactly how to deal with situations after these natural disasters, we said that collective action was most important. But moreover, we think on an individual aspect, I think this will really incentivize individuals to become better citizens. Two levels of analysis. First of all, we think general social awareness when it comes to natural disasters will greatly increase. Exactly how will this incentivize individuals to act? We think it will incentivize individuals, for example, to build stronger houses or incentivize to live in stronger houses so that it can prepare itself better when it comes to tornado season, for example. We think individuals will more care about their most fundamental lifestyles so they can better be prepared for natural disasters that could possibly happen anytime. That's exactly why that's so good under our model. Because under our model, we have the government providing education and providing resources. But moreover, we see that the individual or micro level of incentive or micro level of action that comes from individuals will work in a complementary manner with the action provided by the government. A second level of analysis is this. We think the people will feel much more secure, much more safe, but more importantly, we think the people will have much more trust in the government. Why? Compared to situations or compared to an increase in GDP growth, the stark decrease in casualties that happens after natural disaster. For example, like 20% increase in GDP compared to last tornado season, 2,000 people were killed. This time, 2 people died. Within the latter situation, where the stark difference in casualties is more visible. What does that mean? As an individual that lives in, for example, a disaster-prone country, we think that individual will be able to visibly feel the difference, or will visibly see the impact of the government policy when it comes to preventing natural disasters, when it comes to minimizing the harms of natural disasters, compared to any other government idea that an individual feels that his government is doing something for them. I think the very idea that the individual can visibly feel for themselves the government is actually trying so much and the government has succeeded to some extent will allow the individuals to become much more trusting the government in the first place. I think that will lead to greater differences, for example, having more government. We think that will lead to more changes, for example, having more trust in the government, that will lead to more participation in government policies or future policies of the government when it comes to policies that implement the entire society. But fundamentally, we think you're likely to live in a secure environment. More importantly, your government protecting your life or your secure environment, we think is the most fundamental right that all individuals will care about. So that's a fundamental reason why we think as an affirmative, we're very proud to propose. The ideas coming from the affirmative analysis are very clear. First of all, we think that the government has a moral obligation to protect its citizens. Why? Because your right to live is the most fundamental and universal right. But more importantly, the government is the only possible actor that can act. But second, and more importantly, we tell you that the government is the most efficient actor when it comes to enacting policies, when it comes to saving your life. And third, we think it will affect the society to we think it will affect the society to become more politically involved even. For those reasons, we think the government should be morally and legally liable no matter what. We're very comfortable.
I thank Chad and Robert and Ida to give you the case for the negative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We believe that government do not intentionally fail to disaster-proof to kill their own citizens because government have to. We believe that government have to choose other staff for to provide more tangible benefit for their own citizens to achieve their preference. Government is a very act that represent citizen voice, and they do not have intention to abandon disaster-proof without other reasons. So we believe that government do not want to be criticized by other citizens for the election or for keeping their powers. So when government fail, we believe that when government have to decide from solution, One is to make some facilities for natural disasters. We believe that such kind of stuff is to mitigate the very low risk of the natural disasters. More than that, we believe that government should seek the other option that is connected to the more tangible benefit of their citizens, and it will match their own preference. Therefore, we would like to hold this motion. Today, I'd like to provide 2 points to talk about. Firstly, I'd like to explain why government is not responsible for the life of their citizens always, and I'd like to justify why argument is legitimate. And secondly, I'd like to explain why citizens want to be reflected to the policies and why it is practically unbeneficial for citizens' daily life. Before that, I'd like to make similar download to the previous speaker. Firstly, the previous speaker mentioned that government can decrease the cost after natural disasters. That is because the life or so many facilities are held in the natural disaster is irreversible, etc. However, Mr. Speaker, how they use money or how they use the resources is completely wrong, and we believe that is not efficient at all. That is because in their product, they will pay money for dead people or dead families. Rather than that, we believe that using money for living people is more efficient and more better than their stable house. We believe that kind of people still have a life, and we believe that to sustain such kind of people is more beneficial in terms of the growth, they explain, or etc. And secondly, the previous speaker mentioned about trusting. The people feel that more trusty to the government, and they will focus on the policies or etc. more. However, Mr. Speakers, why such kind first of all, why people do not have so much trustees do not have so much trust in the status quo is not explained by DSR laws. We believe that even in the status quo, most or majority of citizens have strong interest to our policies, and they can constantly enough about that because it is directly related to their daily life. Therefore, they have incentive to do that. So we believe that in terms of that, there is no necessity. Then let me move on my first point. Why government is not responsible for the life in terms of natural disasters? We believe that when citizens believe and need to abandon their house or life for some kind of preference, we believe that government should not be responsible for that. That is ultimately their citizens wanted government to do that. For example, in the case of tobacco, we believe that citizens wanted to smoke that abandoning their life or their health. That is because there is citizens' preference exists. So in the same way, we believe that in this case, that for the citizens' preference, government have no responsibilities for their health or their life the same way. So, for example, actual case of natural disaster in the Nepal or some southeastern countries, we believe that they can do more stuff. We believe that citizens have the more preference about development or etc. So we believe that in that occasion, we believe that responsible for their life because of their own preference. Is related to the policies and why it is embarrassing for citizens' daily life. That is the second point. We believe that after taking this proposal, a facility or something for the public good will be available to some extent. That is because they have less available money because they only focus on the disaster proof and not on other things. That is because, for example, to make water break for protecting citizens from tsunamis, it is quite an extremely expensive stuff. Millions of dollars is necessary for each 1 meter water blade. Therefore, also we believe that is a very diverse stuff, and there is tsunami, and there is earthquake, and there is typhoon, and there is flood. They have to be prepared for all kind of the health care or so many stuff will be not available. In the case of healthcare services, it is one of the most costly part of the policies and people other payments to make other possibility to prevent the natural disasters. We believe that the money for that kind of tangible benefit is not available. In the same way, in terms of education, the money will not so much used. Also, more importantly, in the case of Nepal, many people have no house inside of the countries. People need house to maintain and protect their own life. And we believe that government have an important role to provide their house by subsidizing it. In terms of that, because of the government try to use lots of money for disaster proof, the many citizens have to live without house. So we believe that kind of to achieve the tangible benefit, we believe that kind of stuff is quite necessary. So, but in the status quo, we believe that government try to maintain the balance between the disaster proof or other kind of tangible benefit. That is because they are not restricted by this kind of law. They can provide more tangible benefit rather than the risk among other students or preference. So in terms of this practical benefit, I'd like to compare their side and our side, possibly about the tangibilities. As we continuously explain, maybe that kind of the benefit of healthcare services or some kind of stuff is very tangible benefit. That is because many people are always suffering from the illness. Or many people are suffering from poverty. Government have raised such kind of suffering, but that's quite tangible benefit. With that kind of once the earthquake happens, we believe that some people will die, but the number is limited. Compared to that, many people are suffering from the illness or they are dying every day. In terms of the numbers, and according to the utilitarian curriculum, we can protect more citizens. Therefore, we would like to oppose this motion. Thank you for listening.
I think Majahida Atsuyan was static, is referred to the vote redemption.
Mr. Speaker, when there's a situation where I lose all of my money while trying to invest in a company, therefore I cannot sustain my life tomorrow. Can find some kind of way to rescue me, because that's the relationship between the government and the citizens to begin with. When it comes to a relationship between the government and the citizens, we think that it's a rather different relationship from any other kind of relation, where it's a strictly give and take. We think that when it comes to government and citizens, it's something that exceeds that. When the citizen of a nation cannot sustain his or her life for tomorrow, whether that be the fault of the government or not, we think that the government has the responsibility and is responsible. But when they provide liabilities, we think that there's all the more legitimacy to actually ask the government for legal liability, and that's basically the stance coming from the government side. But a more probable scenario that's more relevant, but not systematically. Then in these situations, the government is more reliable. They provide you for minimum living standards or whatnot, and if they do not, they are legally held reliable. When they were harmed, therefore, they had to rent. In these situations, when we especially told you that it's only the government who has the capability of rescuing and saving these citizens, we definitely think that they should be held reliable. Having said that, let's go on to the two main questions that we have in today's debate. First, who is responsible? And second, I would like to give you the benefits and harms of each model. So going on to the first question, who has the responsibility? If we look at the motion, Mr. Speaker, we think that there are two premises that exist. First, that the government has failed to provide disaster proof, and second, therefore, death has occurred and my citizens have died. We think that these two premises are enough to actually ask the government for a legal liability, because not only is the first responsibility of the government to protect my safety, but second, we think that for the citizens, individuals themselves, it's their first right to be able to live. They have the right to live. But coming from the affirmative, we gave you another premise, right? That the government is the only actor to actually save these people. We think that in many cases, it does take responsibility when there's no other actors to do so. For example, when it comes to building infrastructures, whether that be roads, whether that be traffic lights, we think that there's two kinds of characteristics. First, that these are necessities that people need. And second, there's no other actors to build this if it's just left to the public by themselves, because property situation does because no one else for our citizens to live. We think that the same situation is occurring when it comes to who is responsible for natural disasters. They say that the government did nothing wrong; they don't have the responsibility. But when it comes to actually compensating for the deaths that occurred, when it comes to rescuing these people and reestablish after a disaster has happened, we think that number one, it is a necessity that these people have and need in order to live tomorrow. But secondly, we think that no one else would do it if it's simply, like I already told you, when it comes to natural disasters, it's hard to pinpoint an actor that caused it because there is no actor. And therefore, if it's just left to the public, no one will definitely have responsibility. In this kind of situation, we think that it is legit ask the government for responsibility, others that can act, and given that it's likely the situation those who are going through that are willing to hold it. But going on to the second, the two sides. Now we have a negative side that basically agrees that the government is the best actor, and the simple response that they gave was first that they're already doing enough, and second, because the government has limited resources, they should allocate it to other places as well. Let's engage in both of their arguments. First, they said that the government is already doing enough. I think that that's great. If they're already doing enough, probably nothing will change even though we hold them legally liable because they're already moving. We think that nothing will change for these situations. However, we think that they're probably not doing scenarios. We think that this now becomes an incentive to take more disaster-proof facilities in order to save the lives of your citizens. So at the end of the that will worry that it is a gain at the end of the affirmative side. But secondly, that they talk about like there's limited resources, and therefore the government has a natural incentive to allocate the resources in other places as well, such as healthcare or whatnot. They say that that's going to be hindered. We think that this is not true because of the very characteristic of natural disasters. When it comes to natural disasters, we think that it's something that has huge impact on the people. It's something that kills the most amount of people in the shortest time, which is the reason why we think that once it happens, it has a huge impact on society. It's probably the only thing, rather than genocide, that can kill thousands and perhaps millions of people at once. Because when natural disasters once happen, so many people can be caused dead at once. We think that it's even it concentrates preventing natural disasters rather than I think that the very characteristic of natural disasters makes it a natural incentive for the government to actually invest more money on natural disasters. Therefore, we think that even if the government are pushed to a certain extent to concentrate more on investing in these fields rather than other fields, we still think that that's okay, because at the end of the day, we think that it's natural. That very characteristic of natural disasters is that it can cause huge casualties. We want to stop them. But even if it means that it's not like we're not talking about thousands of millions of people, we're already told you that in most cases, these natural disasters are foreseeable. We think that it is the government's responsibility to actually take actions. They tell us that it may take millions of dollars to build walls in order to stop tsunamis. However, if we know that a tsunami is occurring, and we know that probably at least 1 or 2 people are going to die, we think that that's more incentive to actually invest those $1 million, because at the end of the day, we think that when it comes to a relationship between the government and the citizens, it's not about how much money it costs, but if I can actually save the life of my citizens today, and I know that something is occurring, we think that that is a responsibility of the government to do so. But then finally, they never engaged in any of the benefits and the exclusive benefits that the affirmative side came up and told you. For example, we told you that this is actually developing. We also told you that now the citizens will be more aware because the government as a whole and as its collective action is taking actions. Therefore, we told you that now the citizens can act more responsibly when these kinds of natural disasters happen. We heard no response coming from the negative side. So at the end of the day, we want a government that is responsible for the lives of the citizens, especially when it's the only actor that can actually save the lives and when it's directly linked to the life and death situation of the citizens. We want it to happen, not only because first we think that it is a basic responsibility of the government, but second of all, we told you all the practical benefits that come from this policy, and we heard no responses from the negative. We think that at the end of the day, it is the government, it is the affirmative side that saves more lives and make sure, not only preemptively make sure that it saves more life, but even after a natural disaster occurs, in the long run, we think that it's the affirmative side that saves more lives.
I think Young actually conclude the debate financially. How to conclude this part of this debate financially.
Thank you. And most governments actually care about their citizens' lives. And if some citizen actually doesn't care about disaster, the government should actually respect the citizens' voices. And we don't understand why, in some cases, the citizen doesn't really want disaster, but he wants to actually the development of the country, why the government can actually neglect it. And we think there are those kind of cases, Paul or other doesn't care about that, which might be very rare, and we don't, and they have the reasons for the top of that be proof. Simply, I want to talk about which is practically good for the citizens as a whole. And the government, from this side, only talk about one country where the citizens are actually wanting those like safe environments, and they claim that it is a fundamental right. But we think that we already told you that in those kind of cases, the government is not viable because they are already trying their maximum effort to actually like reflect the citizens' voices. Why is that? Firstly, we already told you that this government have incentive to listen to the citizens' voices because they are chosen by election, and if they actually neglect the citizens' voices, they will lose the next election. So government is already trying their maximum effort to provide this kind of environment. And we told you that, and we told you from the first speaker, when the government is trying their maximum effort, we don't really think government is viability at all. And which is that just because the government that is why government should pay for it. But that can all be said to any kind of cases. For example, maybe if there is like a criminal case that happens, that can be like said to any other cases, and we don't see any uniqueness to why just because the government has the most capacity, they should really pay for it. For the affirmative side, they think that it is always also predictable, so that is why the government should be the one who should pay for it. But we already told you that that's not always the case. For example, in Japan, when the tsunami happened, but in most cases, the tsunami only went up to 10 meters. But in this case, and that was the first time it went up to 40 meters, and it's not always predictable. And we think that in those kind of cases, the government had, even when the government did maximum effort, we think that in those kind of cases, the government should not be liable. They said that even if the government did the maximum effort, they should be liable, but they had no reason at all. And we think that that is not how the system works in the status quo. For example, just because the government has social contract with its citizens, that doesn't mean when the government was unable to provide a safe environment, they're completely liable. For example, we have police, and just because the government is the one who's trying to save citizens from such dangerous crimes, and police is trying to maximum work. There are crimes that happen, and the police is not legally liable. Just because a citizen was shot or murdered, that doesn't mean the government has to pay for the citizens just because they were unable to actually protect the citizens from such crimes. We don't think that that is what is happening, and we think those kind of principles stand. When we do a maximum effort to try to prevent something, we think that personal responsibility, that's always the case in criminal courts. If you do the maximum effort to prevent some crimes, but you were not able to do it, you're usually not guilty of that crime. And we think that's kind of the principle that we stand on in reality. And there's a second case where there's two kinds of country, and the second kind of country is what we told you, but they never engaged, was the country that actually disaster proof. And we think that those kind of countries is not countries like Japan, where earthquakes happen every year or so on, but countries where only maybe earthquakes happen once in 50 years or once in 100 years, or natural disaster is not something that happens really much. And we think that in those kind of cases, that's because if those kind of disaster happens all the time, we think the citizens would want those disaster proofs. And we think that in those kind of cases, when the citizens want to actually prioritize development or those kind of things, we told you that we should not respect the citizens' choices. And we think there was no engagement for them. We told you that having disaster-proof construction is something that is very, very expensive. And if you have, we have to sacrifice a lot of money to do those kind of things, and want to do it, we should respect those choices. We told you an example of tobacco. Will government actually respect the citizens' choices, lifestyle choices, of where they prioritize their luxurious life more than their health? And they never really engaged at all with those kind of things. And we think because they did not engage, of why in those kind of cases the government just can't neglect the citizens' voices. We think we are able to win at this first point. Secondly, I want to talk about which is good for the citizens as a whole. He said that after we take this proposal, there are three things that could be more education. We think that already in the states, providing that we think the disaster happens so frequently, people already have education, and all the process of from disaster is very more trustworthy because the government is there to protect you. We think that in the cases where this country or citizens doesn't want those disaster proof, they will actually have less trust because they think the government is there very ignoring their voices. We think their belief does not really stand at all. Really less towards providing technology, very more investment to provide technology, and that is something very beneficial. But we think that if you invest to provide technology, you are going to sacrifice other basic necessities. For example, in countries like Nepal, there's not much money for the sacrifice maybe basic healthcare or building roads or those kind of things. And we think that would hinder the quality of this, and that is very, very, very bad. We think from the negative side, we told you two harms from of this policy. Firstly, because the laws, maybe in their pattern, the government will have to have strict laws for construction, and we think that it will sacrifice the poor people who cannot afford to pay this, provide those houses that have this for construction, and they will not be able to have a home they will not be have a shelter. They will have to maybe live outside where that is cold. And if they are not able to live in those shelters, they might catch a cold. They might be more likely to have some diseases, and they will be maybe in the worst case they might die, and they never engage. Secondly, like we push that this push that like he'll be liable for the death. So like we think that the money will go to like the dead people, but we think that dead people, because they cannot use their money because they're not alive, we think it's more in our pattern, like it's not gonna be like that no massive level of the money. We can take into shelters and we think on our part of citizens will have a more secure like after disaster, and we think that is much more better. We are happy to propose.
I invite Paul back to deliver the reply.
Pretty strange reason from a decide why the men by right now towards a completely for something is when there is a causality between what the actor has done and the consequence, Mr. Speaker. Really, given that fact, this kind of when they see the contextualization from our side of the house that the government is already doing enough, the government is already constructing a state area where the disaster proof where these kind of citizens are insecure, they are providing the shelters or so forth. We believe that there is no causality between what they are doing and the consequence, which is death. We believe fundamentally the reason why they want to legally make those governments legally liable is changed in the first place. Then let's look at what kind of characterization we have been debating over. Firstly, the technology is developing day by day, as well as the technology of the construction. Then what kind of the country or the government are we talking about in this today? Is where the scarcity exists. Firstly, the welfares are lacking. Secondly, the shelters are lacking, or the education is lacking. That context was never attacked by today's affirmative side. Then given that, is the benefit or the wonderful benefit coming from today's affirmative is really, really workable. Because, Mr. Speaker, what they want to do is that by threatening those kind of governments, by incentivizing those governments to make the construction law for strict construction arena. Mr. Speaker, we live in we have to need a human resource to really make that kind of materials useful and create a very strong architect. There's large cost toward that kind of change. We believe what they are talking is impossible in today's context. Is where the scarcities exist, where the resources are really, really limited. We say that, on the contrary, on the negative side, we say that when the disasters happen, the government should show the grief and for the mental security of the citizens, they must visit the areas where the disaster has attacked, but not being legally liable, because they are the only one actor who can reconstruct the nation, who has the most strongest collective power, who has the most powerful resources for the reconstruction, Mr. Speaker. And we believe that rather using that kind of resources for the compensation for those kind of dead people, that Mr. Speaker, we should rather use this kind of future of the for the region, because and for example the taxes paid by them, we believe those kind of resources should be used for the future generation or the future reconstruction of the nation where the disaster has attacked, Mr. Speaker, because that is the principle of the tax as well, and we believe that for the from the utilitarian calculus, for those nation's reconstruction. Many people, rather recently, where the nation has a limited amount of resources, and when there is people who need the tangible benefit, for example, the shelter they can live in one day as soon as possible. We believe that is the role as a government should play. We are more than happy to stand in the negative.
I think if I invite Chandra to do this.
Mr. Speaker, first, a lot of unverification and analysis coming from the third negative force. I think it was that the government doesn't really have to care about natural disasters. Then they shifted their case and talking about the government has a natural incentive to care. Then came the third negative, told us in certain circumstances, even though people don't want the government to care. We don't really understand what the consistent stance coming from the opposition bench really is in today's debate. But third, terrible strawmanning of the policy coming from the affirmative first speaker. Our policy was simple. One, we want the government to be building bunkers and providing the infrastructure. Second, we want the government to be educating our individuals so that we can utilize the necessarily available resources. Third, we want the government to be proportionately and to be confident, it's not about the average of the dead people will continue to live. It's about using money to stabilize a society that has been traumatized and devastated directly by the natural disasters. It's not pouring money into the ground. Fourth, they don't have a lot of the analysis coming from the affirmative bench. Analysis like how people have the right to live, how that's the most fundamental and universal right. How the government is most efficient when it comes to providing policies that we can minimize the harms of natural disasters. How this will affect individuals in a long-term calculus. A lot of terribly dropped argumentation that came from the affirmative. As a press speaker from affirmative bench, I'm going to summarize today's debate. Two fundamental questions. First, should the government be liable? Second, exactly how would government be incentivized? So the only capable and the only willing actor. Then came the response coming from the opposition bench about how, in a legal perspective, an individual should not be responsible until he has directly committed that harm. We told you, even though the government did not cause a natural disaster, no one can. We think that active omission of the government's action to make sure that when it comes to preventing a disaster from happening in the first place. The second, when it comes to minimizing the harms as a government that could have done so, we think the government should be liable no matter what. Then came a very utilitarian opposition, which told us if the government is doing enough, we don't think the government should be liable anymore. The very response coming from the affirmative was this: we don't think the government should ever be utilitarian when it comes to individuals' life. Even in a case where a single individual is dead, even because the government has provided many good mechanisms to prevent or minimize the harms, we still think the government should be morally and legally liable. Of course, we told you the idea about proportional liability. Compared to a scenario where 2,000 people died because of lack of government regulation, if only 2 people died, then the government, and even in that, should remember for the future's sake exactly what it can do. We don't think the government should ever move on when it comes to cases of natural disaster. Second question, exactly how would this change government action? Exactly how would this incentivize the government to act differently? The best case scenario coming from the negative was this. Second, in certain circumstances, it forces the government not to invest in other necessary fields. The engagement coming from the affirmative was very clear. First, coming from the third affirmative, we told you there are cases where the government doesn't really understand the gravity of the problem. In other words, the government is not willing or capable enough when it comes to investing in natural disasters. The second, with the idea about proportional liability, we told you this is not a matter about capacity, this is a matter about willingness. Therefore, when the government feels it is not capable enough, we told you it has a natural incentive to research or develop further. Or more importantly, we told you it has an incentive to seek help from outer sources like other NGO groups or nearby countries. It's not necessarily a matter about capacity, but we want the affirmative, as the affirmative, we want the government to be willing as much as possible. Another response that came from the affirmative that was undermined by the negative was this: we take natural disasters very seriously. Why? Because the gravity of the harm, where thousands of people could be massacred in a single day. And more importantly, the following social instability and chaos that will deter any social progress that will happen as a result of a natural disaster, we told you, it was a great social cause that will never be undermined by the affirmative bench. We want the government to be responsible and liable, but more importantly, we want the government to be always liable when it comes to matter about humans' life or death situations. For those reasons, we're very proud to propose.
Those things, then I think we should just mention one more time. We get this wrong.
저희가 고등학교에서 서울에서 학생들이 소위 교회 가서 오늘 강의해 주셨던 교육 선생님들께서 설명을 해주실 거니까 그 설명을 듣고